Welcome back to the floor of IAE 2950 for the Xeno Day here at IAE 2950. There's a lot of very interesting ships and history here, so I'm going to be very, very light on this, because if I go into too much detail, we'll probably be here for 40 minutes. Well, I know a lot of you want that. I'd rather do those into those. I'd rather do these into a very concise video format where we can talk about the history, we can talk about individual ships, how they came about, that kind of thing. So this is going to be more like a brief overview, but hopefully interests you a little bit. Let's start with Asperia. Let's go look through the Asperia line. So this is the Vanduul Glaive by Asperia. This is actually a recreation of the Vanduul Glaive, I believe. Asperia Blade. I'm sorry, this is the Blade. This is a recreation of the Blade because the Blade itself and all of the Vanduul ships are actually recreated from designs captured by the UEE. So you see, Asperia, and we'll go into Asperia a little bit more in detail, was founded by a bunch of, two people specifically. Let's see their names. Jovi and Theo Ingston, two brothers, who grew up on Terra, obsessed with lost spaceships. They're the equivalent of the lost media fanatics, people who desperately seek out for like lost media or rare vehicles or ships. They become obsessed with these lost ships, these ships which were no longer in production, these older ships. So they started collecting blueprints, whether they could find them, for these ships. And this eventually evolved into them going to make recreations of ships and then alien ships, because they became so obsessed with the unusual, the different, the exotic. So that is how Asperia got about, and they were allowed to make a lot of these ships because they were so good at kind of filling in the gaps of missing pieces that the Navy asked them to recreate some Vanduul fighters specifically so that they could train against them. So Asperia has this thing called the Boneyard, where it's a top secret facility which has hundreds, if not thousands, of captured Tavaran and Vanduul fighters that they pull apart, examine, put back together, and then use to create new human designs for these ships. This is the Blade, which is a light fighter from the Vanduul. This is one of those ships that you'll see very common in Squadron 42. It's probably one of the most common Vanduul ships that exists. This is also the new design. All the other things we're going to look at are the old designs, which have been updated, but we haven't seen those new designs in the verse yet. Next, we'll look at the Glaive over here. So this is the Vanduul Glaive. Now, the Vanduul Glaives are built for elites in the Vanduul society. Once you've become a veteran in Vanduul society, an ace, you get a glaive. So that it is the higher up vessel. It gives you more combat capabilities, more double the blades, double the guns, and so on and so forth. The new versions are a little bit different in terms of looking, but this is the glaive. So these are the elite fighters for the Vanduul. Now let me go see if I can't find the rest of the Asperia stuff. So give me a second. Yeah, let's go look for the Vanduul stuff, and they'll come back for the Prowler and everything. So give me a second. So it turns out that there are no scythes on the floor. So let's just move on to the Talon, or the Prowler, and then we'll move on to the other two Tavaran ships and come back for the Apoa and Banu designs. So this is the Prowler. Now, the history of the Prowler, I did an entire video on this if you want a more deep dive. The Prowler is a First and Second Tavaran War special ops ship. It is a combat vessel designed for infiltration, exfiltration, and slug matches. It's not great, but it supposedly has a hover mode that allows it to hover along the ground while firing rather than flying. So there were elite warriors who would go into these prowlers. Prowlers were famous in the First and Second Tavaran Wars for being able to sneak up onto capital ships, attach themselves to the hull, disgorge its troops, and the troops entirely wiping out an entire capital ship full of humans before anybody knew what was going on. So these the Asperia got a handle of some of these because of Cabal, the Cabal 3, I think, where they found an entire Tavaran system abandoned, where they were able to find a bunch of these and then take them apart and redesign them, similar to how they did with the Vandal ships. So then they were able to release these as vessels. So these are probably the first real mass-produced Asperia vessels, this one and the Talon, which we'll look at next. So let's talk about the Talon. So one of the things that I didn't mention was that Asperia is obsessed with authenticity. They want to keep their ships as authentic as possible while updating them for modern usage. So here we go with the Talon. Now, the Talon is an equally infamous light fighter. These were raiders, hit and run ships that were designed to come in, just hit as hard as possible and run away. This is the Tavaran Shrike, or sorry, the Tavaran Asperia Talon Shrike. This was the version that was used during the Second Tavaran War because humans in the First Tavaran War figured out how to use Tavaran shields, which are some of the best shield technologies in the galaxy. So the Tavaran developed a way of trying to counter those shields, which was just pure barrage firepower of missiles. So they swapped out some of the guns for more missiles. So there's a ton more missiles on the Shrike. It's a little missile boat, and the first line of publicly available Talon Shrikes and Talons is rolling out to the public in winter of this year, at the end of 2950. So that's why they're showing off in the Holo viewer here. And here's the original Talon. The Talon is unlike the other one. The Talon is an actual recreation. The Shrike is more of an approximation, because the Talon was, much like the Prowler, captured or discovered in the Cabal 3. So in Cabal 3, they were able to find Talons, Shrikes, other weapons and vehicles, and Asperia was able to get the Talons and the Prowlers out and backwards kind of do some what is it called? Reverse engineering. They did some reverse engineering and were able to create near perfect replicas. So unlike the Shrike, which is a approximation of what a Shrike would be, this is an actual one-to-one recreation of the Talon, because the ships that they found in Cabal 3 in the abandoned Tavaran colony were from the First Tavaran War, and the Shrike was developed for the Second Tavaran War. So it's just little slight differences here. So that's a light fighter. Next, let's talk about Apoa. So here are the Apoa Noxes. I call them Apoa. I think it's like Aopoa, I guess. But the Apoa is they're a a xi'an company, specifically which makes all light craft for the Xi'an Empire. Apoa literally means the corporation of House Poa. Now, here's a little bit of a quick overview of the Xi'an culture, which I'm going to be doing a deep dive a little bit later as well. So, Xi'an culture and society is made up of the Emperor, who controls everybody, and then the second level below the Emperor are the houses. The great houses of the Xi'an are the ones who control everything. It's almost like a feudal society, is what the feudal empire is what the Xi'an have. But each house is responsible for various aspects of Xi'an life. But they're always competing against one another. And there are many minor houses which are always trying to climb the ranks up to become more valuable, either through manufacturing or warfare or what have you. Now, the Emperor always has the power because when you're young, all Xi'ans, when they become of age, are forced to serve in the military. And in the military, they give up their house names. So it'd be like giving up our last names or the family names in the United States and many other countries. So you are only going by your first name. So you are essentially renouncing your house when you go into the military and swearing an allegiance to the emperor. So you become, for all intents and purposes, current emperor is Emperor Krei. So for all intents and purposes, all soldiers of the Xi'an Empire are House Krei. So they're, your name may be George. And if you're a Xi'an named George, you're George Krei. This would be who you were, essentially. A minor participant in House Krei. It's kind of how everything works. So everything is done, that's done specifically to make sure that everyone's allegiance is to the emperor and not to the houses. Your first allegiance is to the empire, the second allegiance is to your house. So people take that second allegiance very, very seriously. Probably the only thing that stops them from killing each other in Xi'an and the Xi'an society. So Apoa is pretty infamous inside Xi'an technology because Xi'an society because they have a monopoly on all of these light craft. They got it because they were designing ships. So let me back up a little bit. This is why I wanted to do a deep dive on this rather than me going kind of over it. The Xi'an method of getting contracts to get monopolies for certain industries is combat, skirmishes. In this case, so for instance, if two weapon designers were going ahead, if this one house wanted to become the only weapon designer in the Xi'an Empire, they would develop a weapon, and then their weapon, somebody with their weapon, would fight against the person with the other weapon. So they'd fight at each other, and whoever won that fight would win. It's trial by combat. Now I'm assuming that it's like also combat, like the cooking guys would have a chef bake off, and whoever would win. It's everything is very confrontational, it seems, in this kind of society, at least from this perspective of a Poa, from House Poa. They got this because they turned the symbol of their corporation into the sigil of House Krei, very similar to House Krei, and they put it all over their prototypes. So when it came to the skirmish, they basically said, "You want to blow up a vehicle with House Krei symbols on it?" And the other side was very hesitant to shoot at these guys because they're like, "Oh, well, if I do that, I'm going to make the emperor angry." And remember, everyone is loyal to the emperor first. So that's how they got it. Now, because everyone said, "Oh, you tricked them into doing this. Let's go. Let's go." They had a bunch of rivals pop up out of nowhere thinking that they could take the throne. But take the title for these like manufacturers. But unknowns to them, they developed a brand new engine technology, which is the engine technology that all Xi'an craft use today. And that engine technology just wasn't ready for the skirmish, so they had to use a different design. But the second that the other skirmishes came up, they were just literally being danced around by these Apoa craft and just destroyed anyone who tried to come against them. So for the last 1,000 years, Apoa has been the only ship manufacturer. So that's kind of a cool little thing there. So the Nox is a scout craft designed for racing and combat. You can see some of the engine technology in here. It's mostly hover for this vehicle, but you can see kind of like these disconnected systems which are kind of floating between one another. These are all Apoa technology. This is all how Apoa works. All those kind of floating things is the kind of things that they developed. So then the Nox and the Nox Q, they're very popular open top racers. Now let's talk about the Kartu All, the light scout craft by Apoa. This is the standard scout craft, the Gladius equivalent for the Xi'an Empire. And you can see these circular engines back here. These are the technologies that Apoa perfected in order to gain the title of the monopoly of the ship manufacturing. So Apoa, the other thing to remember is that the Apoa is recently broken into the human market, and so a lot of their attempts to modernize themselves are very aggressive attempts. The people who are negotiating with Nisk wasn't the Xi'an government. It was Apoa. Apoa and Misk have a very tight, close working relationship. I can imagine that Apoa probably aren't the people producing the Misk Hull Ds in the Xi'an Empire, but they were able to negotiate for it so they could get better deals with their neighboring houses. That's the thing you got to understand about the Xi'an Empire, is that the Xi'an houses are all trying to kill each other. And the only thing that's preventing them from going all out civil war is the Emperor. That's the only thing that's keeping them tied together. And the knowledge that the last couple times the Xi'an went into a civil war, it was a bloodbath. Everything ended badly. So it's one of the reasons why their home planet was lost. It was because of them just constantly fighting one another. So the Xi'an's nature is just open conflict with one another. It's their culture which has become kind of repressed that into an internal conflict. So when you see the Khartu-al is an attempt to monopolize and capitalize the human market for their devices. Not necessarily because they want to, secretly take over the UEE. If you're a centralist, that's what you believe. The reality is it's because they need more money. Because if they can use that money, so that they can get more influence. If they get more influence, they have a better chance of getting more power. And that power, the closer to the Emperor, the more influence they have, the more things like money, resources, troops. These are all things that can increase their ability. The Emperor might give them another Forge World, another world. It's not Forge World, Factory World. That's what they call them. So where it's kind of like ArcCorp, but entirely for a factory. That means they get all of those people on that planet, all of those Xi'an on the planet now are part of House Poa. You get what I'm saying? You see how this is working? That Apoa's aggressive influx into human society, as well as some other corporations from Xi'an, are doing it so that they can get more power at home. It's very fascinating, which is why I want to do more of a deep dive on that. All right, so let's finish up with the Banu. So the thing that you got to understand about Banu is that there is no one manufacturer for Banu. The Banu are made up of a bunch of different Sulis. These are guilds that make production facilities or make things in general, everything you can think of. And there is no concept of IP or patent or copyright law. If you have access to plans for a ship, for instance, a Banu Defender, you can make that. So there has been some movement to get Banu ships into human hands, but only a few Sulis are the ones who produce them. And they produce them however they like. They upgrade, they change them as they need to, but in general, the Sulis themselves are the ones who decide who gets what. So no two defenders are necessarily alike. Depends on who you get from there. So that old joke about why the first round of the Banu advertising was off is because there is no marketing department for Banu productions. It's just if that Suli happens to have the marketing budget, they'll sell them. So there's no real brand associated with them. I think this is the Mon Li is the biggest one that we currently know of that creates the Mon Li Suli that makes these defenders. So it's another reason why merchantmen, for instance, in the future will be super rare, because only a few Suli will actually make merchantmen for humans. They're already pretty rare inside Banu space, let alone inside human space. So that's the Banu. There's no Banu. You also notice that the symbol has changed a lot. So the symbol has changed from what it was before to this, and that's just because symbols change. The Sulis only have about a 20-year lifespan at most. So that is it for this at the floor of IA 2950 here at the Xenos. So if the Xenos, the aliens and such. So if you enjoyed this, please do hit that follow the subscribe button. Make sure you like the video if you like this as well. Comment down below, what other ships are you interested in? Do you like the Xenos ships? Do you think they're good? Which one do you think the most of? Which one did you find the most interesting? You like the Asperias, the lost technology finders, the backstabbing Apoa, or the chaotic anarchistic Banu? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, remember, ex Astoria, ad Astra.